Okay, so as we begin here within chapter 14, we are starting to look at the expansion of Islam. So what this first video is going to talk about is just the kind of the beginnings of Islam and Islamic beliefs. We'll talk more about the expansion and Dar al-Islam and kind of life within an Islamic community in the next stuff. So this very first one is really just with the essential question, is just describing the main beliefs of Islam, and as the title suggests, Islamic beginnings. That's all we're talking about. All right, and as always, again, this is just really scratching the surface, kind of getting, just the very beginnings of beliefs within Islam, and, I myself am not an Islamic expert. I will fully admit that. So this is stuff that I've learned throughout the years. Obviously, some of this is coming out of the book, but, other things I've learned from taking classes and from teaching this content before. So as always, if you're curious about other things, definitely feel free to ask, but there are also other sources out there and resources that know a whole lot more than I do, but I also have other resources in case you are interested. All right, so without further ado, here we go with describing the main beliefs of Islam and Islamic beginnings. So within Islam, okay, it is the religion of people who are Muslim. So that is a distinct difference here. So let's make sure that we have that clarified, that Islam is the religion. Muslims are those who follow and practice Islam. All right, and Muslims are found throughout the globe in various different communities and countries, which we'll talk about here in a sec. So the beginnings of the history of Islam, so where does Islam really come from? So it starts out in Saudi Arabia, all right, with a merchant known as Muhammad. And so there's a very similar connection here within Judaism and Christianity. So Muhammad, I think he was about 40 years old. He kind of goes on kind of a spiritual quest, much in the same way that the Buddha does, kind of what we talked about within the last chapter. And, he goes and starts fasting. In a cave, as he's doing so, he is approached by the angel Gabriel. All right, and when that occurs, he is told that, Judaism and Christianity are on the right path, but they are not the correct beliefs. And so the angel Gabriel tells, as kind of like the voice of God, tells Muhammad, you are to be the final prophet, starting with the lineage of Judaism and Christianity. So, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Jesus. Muhammad is to give the final and correct message beyond those other religions. They were on the right path, but they are not fully correct. And so that's kind of where this, religion begins. So it has a lot of the same connections and features within both Christianity and Judaism. And the fact that, Judaism and Christianity, have both the Old Testament. Where they break off is the New Testament. The New Testament is the story of Jesus Christ. Everything before that is the Old Testament. That is essentially Judaism. And they follow the lineage of Abraham's second son, Isaac. All right. Within the story of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, they follow Abraham's first son, Ishmael, through his wife Hagar. All right, so he writes this down, or he gets someone to write it down for him, as he was himself illiterate, and that becomes the basis of the Muslim holy book known as the Quran, much in the same way that the Bible is the holy book in Christianity, and the Torah is the main holy book within Judaism. All right, so the Quran is supposed to be this final version that is supposed to be, the best version, is supposed to have the final word, the final say, extending on the beliefs within Judaism and Christianity. And that is going to be really important when we come back to kind of the expansion of Islam and the treatment of non-Muslims, which is going to be the next video. All right, so Muhammad is considered to be God's final and most important prophet, not saying that, Abraham, Moses, Jesus are not important. They are very much important and very much a part of the story of Islam, but Muhammad is the final one and the most important one. All right. Also, really big distinction between Islam and Christianity is that in Islam, Jesus is just thought of as a prophet and not the Son of God, not supposed to be connected with the Trinity and things like that. So again, another big distinction between the two religions. All right, so some other background information here about Islam itself. It is the world's fastest growing religion. It is being moved through conversion and has been for a very, very long time. But even through these days and the last few centuries, Islam has been the fastest growing one. And that'll be something we could talk about. And that's also one of the reasons why I have these various images here at the bottom, is to show you kind of the diversity and the spread of Islam. Because one of the big things is that everyone kind of thinks that Islam is based in the Middle East, and that's where it does get its start. No question there. but the most heavily populated Muslim countries are not in the Middle East. All right, it is Pakistan, it is India, it is Indonesia. So there's not one size fits all when it comes to Muslims or the Islamic faith, because again, it varies based on communities, based on different practices, and is spread throughout the globe. So, there are certain beliefs that are carried throughout all of Islam, but that does not necessarily fit the approach of every single Islamic group or every single Muslim. So that is something to definitely take care of and to remember. Okay, so spread throughout the world. So Indonesian Muslims here, African Muslims here, and then different ones within the United States, kind of in the bottom left-hand corner. You can kind of see Keith Ellison, the former Minnesota congressman and current attorney general, kind of in that bottom left-hand corner there with the C in the space. But I copied that from the CNN link. So within Islam, and again, we'll talk about the story here, is that Mecca is the most important religious site. It is where the Prophet Muhammad is born, as he tries to spread his religion and kind of speak the word. He is, in fact, thrown out of Mecca for being thought of as a danger to the way of life within Mecca. So he has to flee to the city of Medina, which Medina then becomes the second most important site within Islam, because Medina is where Islam really gets a very large following, and then they come back about a decade later in 622 to Mecca, and I think it's 622, maybe it's 632, I don't remember the exact dates, and conquer Mecca. And Mecca becomes, again, that major religious site. It is the direction of Muslim prayers when we talk about the 5 pillars of faith coming up here. So Medina is where the Prophet leaves, takes his family, and then the religion begins to grow. And we'll come back with more of that. So to be a Muslim, you have to follow the 5 pillars of faith, and you're never going to be tested on the 5 pillars, but there are things you need to know in relation to them that are essentially important for things throughout the entirety of this course. Okay, so here I have our 5 pillars. So the first pillar is known as the declaration of faith, known as the Shahada. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And all that is that you just have to say, that there is only one God, and the Prophet, and Muhammad is his prophet. That is the declaration of faith, and that is kind of the basis of conversion to Islam, and to kind of agree that that's the main tenet. So the other pillars, Muslims are supposed to pray 5 times a day in the direction of Mecca. So here is Mecca here in southwestern Saudi Arabia. Okay, and then here is within Mecca itself, known as the Kaaba, which is the direction within Mecca that they are praying. It is this religious site, and you can't really tell, but it's actually a pretty massive structure inside Mecca. And the Prophet is kind of, again, that really big holding spot within Islam. All right, so they're praying 5 times a day in the direction of Mecca. If you think that's a lot, it's more than Judaism, where we're supposed to pray 3 times a day. All right, so within that, when possible, being the third pillar is to donate to charity. The fourth one, probably a lot of you that are very familiar with Islam or have some passing knowledge are probably aware that they fast during the month of Ramadan, and that changes from year to year based on the fact that it is a lunar calendar, an agricultural calendar. So just like within Judaism, we have, our holidays are the same every year, but the dates change because of the said calendar. So Ramadan is about 40 days of fasting, where no food and no drink from sun up to sundown. So sometimes that can start as early as May. Sometimes it can start as late as September or October. All right, and obviously you go 40 days from when it begins to when it ends. You can eat and drink prior to the sunrise and the sunset, prior to the sunrise and after the sun sets. But those are typically the hottest days of the year, especially if you're living in the Western Hemisphere. And then the last one, this is again really, really big in terms of connections and travel and trade, is making a pilgrimage, if you are able to Mecca at some point in your life, known as the Hajj. And this is going to be something, again, to really play in terms of the connection of Islam and everything else. You are supposed to do this at least one time in your life if you are economically able to, if you are physically able to do that. All right, and that is, again, the big pillar, is to make this journey and kind of experience this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, or supposedly once-in-a-lifetime. People can go multiple times, but you're supposed to do it, at least once if you are able to. Same thing within, fasting within the month of Ramadan. If you're pregnant, obviously you're not supposed to fast because that is endangering your health and the health of the baby. So, you know, there are exceptions to these rules, of course, within every religion, you know, based on physical abilities and, you know, other things going on in your life. So keep that in mind. All right. So within Islam, and this kind of goes with the expansion piece, not something we're going to really talk about here throughout the course, but again, it's really important to know and understand. So here we have a map of a lot of different locations within Islam, okay, within the two different Muslim groups, okay, or the two major Muslim groups, I should say. So the Sunnis are in the green, and so the darker the green, which means that it has a higher Sunni population, and then the Shia or Shiite is in the blue. Okay, so the darker the blue means the more Shia live in those countries. So the Shia Muslims are primarily based within the Caucasus region here, within Iran, and then also within Iraq. Okay, everywhere else is primarily dominated by Sunni Islam. All right, it makes up like 90% of the world's Muslims. The other 10% are primarily based within, you know, these 3 or 4 countries. And so the difference here is after the Prophet Muhammad died, it was kind of a discussion because they never really discussed who leads the Muslim community afterwards. And this isn't necessarily a big point for us, but again, it's just kind of really good knowledge to have. And so within Sunni beliefs, the Islamic community decides, it selects its own leadership. They vote who's going to be the next leader of the Muslim community. All right, the Shia belief is that it should follow the lineage of Muhammad's family. And again, this was never written down. The Prophet never said anything. So this is why it's a point of contention, and it led to a lot of wars back and forth between Sunni and Shia. And obviously, if you follow the issues within Iraq, within Iran, with the issue of ISIS, these are very topical questions and issues that they still face today in terms of treatment within Iraq and Iran and neighboring countries. So it's something that has had a lot of different, has very long-term issues, although not necessarily stuff we're going to talk about in the class, but just to be aware of. All right, and so it followed through his nephew, because the Prophet Muhammad didn't have any sons. And so, yeah, very long legacy within that. The book talks about it as well, but that's about as far as we're going to cover it here. So the last thing we're going to talk about here is the issues of Sharia law and jihad. So these are very controversial topics because oftentimes they get misconstrued within the media and within the news. So within Sharia, Sharia law is just Islamic holy law. All right, it's developed based on stuff that is given in the holy book, the Quran, and things that the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have said while he was still alive. And so essentially it's just supposed to give Islamic law, kind of like in the same way with Judaism, you have Judaic law, Christianity, in terms of like, Catholics and Lutherans, you have your own religious beliefs and things you're supposed to follow based on that. So meant to just kind of give clear guidance for how a Muslim should live an ethical life based on religious principles. That's no different than really any other religion. But people hear the word Sharia and they oftentimes figure that, it's going to be, it's Muslim law, it's going to interfere with the way we live our lives. It doesn't have to. All right, some countries do, in fact, follow Sharia law, depending on how strict they are within their interpretations of the Quran and what they're supposed to be. If they are just a religious country and they follow that and that alone, yes. But in many countries, and in many Muslim countries, they mix and match, or their Sharia is very limited. And there's, again, kind of like within the United States, there is that separation of church and state. So yeah, based on, as we said, those teachings, and Sharia law is, malleable. It changes over time as society changes, and it's not the same from one Islamic community to the next. Based on needs and based on values, it changes. So again, this is just a very controversial topic that I think gets thrown a lot of grief and a lot of misunderstanding. Now, the term jihad is also something, obviously, that has come up a lot, especially within the last 20 years with 9/11 and things like that. And obviously ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So the word jihad is the definition of the word struggle or to struggle. It's often connected with the idea of war against infidels or threats to Islam. And in many cases, that is a struggle. But it could also relate to things like internal struggle of just grappling with faith, or things that, how do you live an ethical life in times where your ethics are challenged based on, jobs you want to have or money you want to make, or just ignorance. And again, this also varies by person, by who you are and what community you live in. So it varies. So these two terms are thrown out a lot, and they're obviously given a lot of negativity. So we're going to stop here and cover up with the expansion of Islam in the next video. So Hope found that fine.